for authors, filmmakers, entertainment, and all your listening needs. Listen now to Talk Now Radio, where no topic is taboo.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me this morning, or this afternoon, should I say, is Karen Tate, the author of Goddess Calling. And, well, Karen was on my other segment on Revolution Radio 3 or 4 Thursdays ago, and we had a really excellent show, and she was gracious enough to agree to come over here and share about her book and herself over here on this show with you guys as well. So we got her all set up for today. I think you folks are in for a treat. Karen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me back, Royce. I really appreciate the chance to talk to your listeners.
Well, I want to thank you for coming back on the air. It's going to always, I think, be a pleasure to have you. I know you're going to probably have future books coming out in the future. We'll probably hook up and, talk again somewhere down the road, I'm pretty sure. But judging from the last show that we did, well, I thought we worked pretty well together, and I think it's going to be a good show.
I agree. We had fun.
So that gets us right up to the meat of the topic here, which is your book, Goddess Calling. And before we go into that, this is something I didn't think to mention till later on in the show over at Revolution Radio, was the fact that you're not just working on Goddess Calling, but you also took a part in the documentary Femme Women Changing the World. Is that correct?
Yeah, I sure did. It's actually Femme Women Healing the World, but
Oops.
It's changing, healing. That's okay. In the end, it's all sort of the same thing. We hope that maybe women, or maybe more specifically ideals of the sacred feminine, are healing and changing the world, or can heal and change the world. That documentary was financed by, in part, executive produced by Sharon Stone, the actress, and actually there were a lot of people who contributed to the film, but she's probably the name people recognize most. And the producer of Wonderland Entertainment, called Emmanuel, ATA, he's a wonderful French man who I look at him and I think of him as a Renaissance man. He is definitely the man of the future. He really sort of gets it. The film... and if your listeners are interested, you can Google Femme, F-E-M-M-E, the movie, or you could go to my website, KarenTate.com, and on the front page of my website, if you scroll down just a little bit, you'll see the logo of the Earth, and you can click on it, and you can either stream it live or download it. I think it's like $4.99 is all. And, I really encourage people to do that, and maybe, instead of like your book club kind of discussion, maybe have a movie night and show the film, because it's a courageous film. It starts at the beginning, and I'm happy to say I was in it, and I have some little snippets, and I talk about the sacred feminine, and how the sacred feminine is about the we and the us instead of the I and the me. And it goes through, how we believe, scholars will say in ancient cultures, when we still revered a feminine face of God or a goddess, that oftentimes women were more elevated in society, or we had more equal, egalitarian societies. But then as patriarchy takes over, as mythology changed, and the feminine face of God was swept beneath the rug, so to speak, and we only see this male God, this monotheistic, God or Yahweh, with Allah, whatever you want to name you put on him. Patriarchy comes, on the scene across the globe in humanity, and that's the rule of the father, the rule of men. And it gives men license to dominate women, dominate the earth, and puts women in a second-class status. And, you can actually, connect the dots between losing a feminine face of God and women being second-class citizens across the globe. There's a direct correlation there. So when people say to me, well, why do you care about these ancient goddesses? Well, we know that when mythology shapes our society, and if our mythology ignores the feminine face of God and only teaches about the male face of God, then it's out of balance. And that's what we end up with. We end up with male leadership when we only have a male God in our mythology or in our religion. And, the film, talks about that so people understand how things were, how things changed. But it's really solution-oriented. It doesn't just bitch. It gives solutions. And really the solution to everything that ails our planet is partnership. And, partnership is what the sacred feminine or goddess is all about. And that's what I talk about in my books. And, and because partnership, whether we're talking about us and our spouse or us and our friends or, whether we're talking about partnership between corporations. Yeah, husbands and wives,
boss and employee. I mean, I think it's in all facets.
Yeah, because, there's so much domination out there. We have corporations dominating employees. We have corporation abusing consumers. We have corporations destroying the earth. We have governments destroying other governments. One religion wants to, dominate or destroy another religion. We are obsessed with domination and control and exploitation rather than partnership. So we're talking about partnership, and, maybe partnership might even lead to love. What do you think, So we want to try to create win-win situations in partnership rather than this dominator capitalistic idea of there's got to be a winner and a loser. One person has to dominate the other and control the other, and we see how out of balance that has made our society. The earth is being destroyed, the species are dying. Jimmy Carter just put out his new book, A Call to Action, talking about discrimination of women across the globe is one of the biggest sins that nobody even talks about. You have Republicans going on the rampage right now because we're talking about equal pay for women. Just a year or two ago, they went on the rampage when we wanted to have a law protecting women from domestic violence. We live in a crazy world, and, we need to get rid of this domination and exploitation. Everything isn't always or shouldn't always be about let's exploit somebody for cheap labor, because that's what it comes down to. Exploit somebody for cheap labor or exploit somebody so you can control them because it somehow benefits you,
Which is the main thing people are into today is control, like you were saying earlier. If you look back through history, and I'm pretty sure you're aware of this, back in the early days of Egypt, back in the time of Zep-Tepi, and even after Zep-Tepi, long before monotheism came along, they had pagan worship in which it didn't matter. They were all male, female gods, being worshipped pretty much equally. And during this time, it was considered pretty much a golden age because everybody lived in peace.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, even the Romans, who dominated so much of the globe, they knew if they wanted to keep peace and order in their kingdom, and they did for a very long time, they allowed their conquered people to keep their gods as long as they paid homage to the emperor, And but we don't have that tolerance now, we don't, and also too, you think back about, it was the Greeks who gave us so much of our knowledge, that we base so much of our society on. They were pagans. You look at the founding fathers; they were deists, but they were also Freemasons, and Freemasons understood the importance of having a balance between the masculine and the feminine. You even see in a lot of their symbols, you'll see two columns. and those columns represent the masculine and feminine. You see the same thing in the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. You have, they respect the masculine and the feminine, the two different, sides. So we tend to lose that. Christianity came along and made us and sort of demonize the material world. Everything was about, God was outside of ourselves. That the earth wasn't sacred anymore. Humanity wasn't sacred anymore. So that sort of, I think, sort of set the stage for abuse and domination. And I think it's and the earth and this. Really we look at the earth as the feminine consciousness. We look at women as the feminine consciousness. We look at the ideas of caring, sharing, nurturing as the feminine consciousness. I mean, you look at a farmer, for instance. He has to do all of these different things to the earth for things to grow. He's got to, he's got to take care of the soil. He's got to plant. He's got to water. He's got to make sure there's no frost. Well, that's nurturing the soil, and when he nurtures the soil, things grow. That's that's sort of a feminine concept. So, there's this idea that that the pagans used to have, that the earth was sacred. That went out the window with Christianity. And I think until we can restore that idea that everything is sacred, everything in the cosmos is sacred, we will not respect the earth or the species or other people or the female gender. And we, and we are, I think, doomed to continue down this, spiraling down this hole.
Well, I think a lot of it is also it becomes a lot easier to destroy an entire rainforest once you don't have to have respect for that rainforest anymore.
True, and I mean, we're so short-sighted. I hate to say it, but we have so many people in business who want to deny science. They want to deny the climate is changing. They want to deny if they destroy the rainforest that it's going to affect the atmosphere, and, we're not going to be able to purify the air, because everything's always about the bottom line and and money. And what's ridiculous is, a few decades ago, CEOs used to make 35 times as much as their workers. Now they make sometimes 350 times more than their workers. And, who is worth that kind of money? Unless you're curing cancer or solving, or solving poverty across the globe or figuring out a way to give everybody on the planet free electricity. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't think anybody is worth that kind of money. And to make that kind of money, you're exploiting your workers, you're raping the environment, you're maybe selling people things that aren't safe for them, because there's no integrity left. It's all about greed. And we as individuals, I think we have to do everything we can to shift things, because if we don't do it, if we don't get together in solidarity and sort of change things at the grassroots level from the ground up, the powers that be, who have all the money, who have the control, they're not gonna change what they're doing. We have to make them change.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of people don't seem to realize they want to blame the elitists, in some cases religion, some cases governments, the Illuminati. Personally, I think all three go hand in hand, but the point is they blame them while they're the ones enabling them. And, Americans are the ones that have the elitists outnumbered. Yeah. Why are they controlling the majority instead of the majority standing up and taking some kind of hold, in other words?
Well, it's true. We do have the numbers. We do have the numbers, even though, we see right and left Republicans are jerry-rigging the system so people can't vote. We're supposed to be about democracy, but here we have one party thwarting democracy. We have one party that's so corporate-oriented. They don't care about people. They only care about the corporations getting richer, and rich people will not pay any taxes, or corporations not paying any taxes. But we can do something. We can stem the tide of that. And, you just look at different examples of it that give us hints. And we can take these hints, and if we could muster up some tenacity, we could keep the ball rolling, so to speak. I remember when Sandra Fluke was the target of Rush Limbaugh's ugly hatred and sexism, when she was talking about women should have access to contraception, and he started saying ridiculous bull, and he has not recovered from that, in the sense that he still loses advertisers. So, we may be uber consumers, but we can use that power as consumers to get people's attention. We just need to focus. And for instance, one thing would be, if you are tired of the Koch brothers buying politicians, then go on the internet and see what products the Koch brothers produce, and don't buy their products, and tell all your friends don't buy their products. If you want to make sure you don't have GMOs in your grocery store, well, you get together with your friends in your neighborhood and you go to the local grocery store and say, I'm not going to buy anything from your grocery anymore till you label what's in your food. I think we can do that. We can target industries, and we can do email campaigns. Like I was just talking on a recent radio show about Orville Redenbacher was trying not to come out and say if they had GMOs in their popcorn. Well, a doctor confronted them and said she knows they have GMOs in their popcorn, and her patients are getting sick because of it. And she said, if consumers knew stuff like that, then they could target these companies and say, you know what, until you get rid of the GMOs, I'm not going to buy your product anymore. We have the power of the purse. We have the power when it comes to a certain extent, who we vote for, who we put in office. And if we care about women, if we care about the environment, if we care about the poor, then you don't vote for the party who's cutting food stamps and not giving women equal pay and supporting oil companies and giving them corporate welfare to, frack our drinking water and, pollute the Arctic or the Gulf or rivers, with their waste, or, with the products they're, pulling up out of the earth. I mean, it's that simple. Royce, when you think about it, how much simpler could it be? Do you continue to prop up a husband that beats you, for instance? I mean, should you continue to love and support and be married to a man who beats you? I use the same analogy. Should you support and give your money to a corporation that's poisoning you? Should you continue to vote for a politician that is voting against your best interests? It's the very same thing. And I think we have to find a way to have solidarity, for some things, and attack some problems with solidarity, but we can have it make a difference just by what we purchase, where we spend our money, or go to Starbucks one day less a week, take that $5 and, send it to a cause you believe in, because your $5 might not be a lot, but your friend's $5 and their friend's $5 and their friend's $5, it all adds up,
Yeah, it sure does. And, it's like you say, we do have the power of purchase behind us. And I don't think many people really realize just how powerful that power is. I mean, it seems to me like it was maybe just about 2 years ago that they went a little bit too high with the gas prices, that everybody decided, hey, we're not going to buy gas, and people started actually riding their bikes for a while, that all of a sudden within the week the gas prices came down drastically.
Isn't that interesting? You know, so you see, I mean, that's a great example. I remember when a couple years ago when Congress was discussing immigration, so many people called the White House and Congressional Switchboard that the system collapsed. Now imagine if we got organized and did that about, you know, worker exploitation. Or, you know, we're tired of our environment being poisoned, or we want to know what's in our food, you know, or we're tired of war. You know, we're tired of our tax dollars being spent to make, you know, companies that make bullets and bombs rich. We want to spend our tax dollars on us, Americans, you know, for education, for infrastructure, for job development. You know, it's real. When you think about it, it's simple. You know, it's just a matter of taking some organization and focusing a little bit of our time, because how long does it take to make a phone call? You know, to send a fax, to call your congressperson's office, or to call a corporation and say, you know, I'm not buying your product anymore. You're poisoning me.
And how much effort does it really take to, say, find somebody that you think you can rely on better than the people that's running for office now, and support them and back them up into the higher office?
True. You know, I mean, we have a Supreme Court that's right-leaning, that is pro-corporate, that is not only gutted, you know, voter laws, you know, so that you know, democracy can be thwarted now. They've also given the rich, you know, a blank check to totally buy our democracy. We should be burning up the Supreme Court switchboard, telling them that they're out of their mind, we're not going to take it anymore, and we're going to do everything we can to get them out of office, because, you know, they have conflicts of interest that are very clearly making decisions that are against the good of the American people, you know?
No doubt about it. You see pictures on Facebook day in and day out about politicians that are, especially Republicans, getting all these massive pay raises and, you know, other black budget spending things, living like the rich, the whole time saying, well, we got to cut back. We have to get rid of food stamps and Medicare, for example.
Yeah.
And this is true. It is going on. But why are we doing nothing more than just complaining about it?
I know. I know that it amazes me as well, and I think part of it is, you know, we lack the organizational structure to put some of these things that we're talking about in effect. And we're waiting for somebody else to do it, you know. But let's say, for instance, you know, a lot of us maybe belong to the PTA, or maybe we belong to a book club, or, you know, we belong to a church. What if we got the people in our little groups together and focused on one thing? You know, maybe it's writing letters to Monsanto or Orville Redenbacher, or it's, you know, the companies that frack, or it's the Supreme Court, or it's some Republican. You know, whatever it is, focus on something and make a concerted effort with your small group of people to pound them and pound them and pound them. And you know what? Then maybe the people in your group can sort of expand on it a little bit and get, you know, another group that you're connected to involved, and keep growing the group, you know. There's nothing to stop us other than, I think, our own feelings of disempowerment. You know, we have to make the time if we want to change things. You know, we have to make the time to call our congressman and say, yes, we want health care. Yes, we want equal pay. Yes, we want the minimum wage raised. You know, we have to take the time to do those things, I think it's really possible to get our friends on board, to have them spend 5 minutes and do the very same thing. We just have to stop thinking the way we've been thinking. It's sort of a shift in our consciousness. Spend less time bitching on Facebook, and pick up the telephone and leave a message at your congressman's office, or send a letter to the Supreme Court, or an email, or the White House. Wherever you want to focus, just do it. Do it. And if you can, bring 5 friends along and get them to do it too.
Well, I mean, you look at things like Twitter and you look at Facebook, and these things have literally millions of users, and these are active people posting things left and right, personal, political, religious, you name it, it's there. If you could get put up a social network like one of those and attract the people off of Facebook or Twitter or both that are share the same views that you do, that see the same things going on, into one location, then when you got ready to have a petition to sign to send up to the government, you'd have all those people in one location ready to sign it.
Yeah, you would. I mean, we have so many ways to do this today with social media that we ought to be doing it. I mean, look at what Eve Ensler puts together, once a year on Valentine's Day, 1 million rising, or it might be 1 billion rising, in the flash mobs that happen across the globe trying to counteract domestic violence, and she does that just with a website, and, I think we're so used to waiting for somebody else to do it, thinking that, we don't have the power or we don't have the know-how, when actually we do, and if we're not sure we know how to do it, I'm sure we can figure out how to do it if we just ask some questions. I think there's so many of us that know things are not working for the 99%, that we would find lots of allies if we just looked for them. We would find the help. We would find the support. And, I think we have to think local. I think we have to think global. There's so many, places out there that we can put our energy, efforts that are organized right now, to get behind. But I guess I'm just saying, do something, activate yourself. You will feel like you're making a difference. I know for me, when I get out there and I do something, I feel hopeful, and I feel like we can make a difference. And that feeling sure beats the heck out of sitting at my computer bitching with people on Facebook.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think this is what you're saying. The movie film Women Healing the World is really all about, is encouraging people to do some of the stuff that you're talking about here. And, let's face it, we got people that sit around at home and they'll, oh, yes, I do agree. This is a bad situation. It's clear anybody can see it, but hey, they're the government. They're the, the big guys. You have no hope. What can you do? I'm just one person. And these people here might get on board with another group if there was other people that was just, available, that would say there is something to be done. You don't have to lose hope. You could join us and we could try to fight the cause together.
Right. Well, and look at it from this standpoint. What if you're unemployed and you can't find work? Then if it were me, I would make it my job, as long as I was unemployed, to go up against one particular cause, or two particular causes, whether it be phone calls, letters, organizing other people, that I would make that my job, quite frankly. I would make that my job. I wouldn't sit home and watch Jerry Springer. I'm
sorry you struck my funny bone that time.
Well, I mean, we can get caught up and we get in a rut and we get depressed, and I think action. I think action fights against that feeling of depression, that feeling of hopelessness, that it's overwhelming. And, and FEM is really about teaching people that we really do need to have partnership because patriarchy has brought domination, exploitation, violence into our world, and we don't need that anymore. We don't want that anymore. We want balance. We want fairness. We want equality. We want partnership. And that's what the sacred feminine is about. That's what feminine ideals are about, nurturing, caring, sharing, the we and the us, not the I and the me. And, I think if we all started thinking that way, whether it be, maybe making a casserole for the old lady down the street who maybe doesn't have enough food stamps to keep her going through the month, or it's our sick friend who needs help, or you know what I'm saying? We have to try to help one another, and I think we have to nurture the idea that caring and sharing is a good thing, and that it's not a weakness. And obliterate these ideas of survival of the fittest. Make taboo the idea that greed is good, because remember, it used to be one of the 7 deadly sins. What changed? Poor people aren't the enemy. They're not lazy takers. Most poor people can't get jobs, or their circumstances are such that they're down and out right now. They need a hand up. They need help. They don't need their food stamps cut or their unemployment benefits stopped. They need Congress to create more jobs in the United States. So yeah, I mean, I think when we take care of ourselves and we take care of our fellow human beings, it uplifts all of society. It can't just be about what's best for us.
Yeah, and I can definitely relate to what you're talking about. I mean, I'm sitting over here disabled, couldn't work if I wanted to with my lungs the way they are. And I just recently had my food stamps cut from 200 to 20. And as it stands, they're looking at cutting my lights off next week if I don't do something. So, yeah.
Well, Royce, I'm really sorry to hear that. I wish your listeners, is there a way they can send in, $5 to help you? Do you have anything
a few people have sent in some, a few people have sent in some money to PayPal to help out with it. I'm still trying to raise the rest of it. But I do have a PayPal donation thing on the upper right of my webpage over here if somebody wants to, click on that and go do that. But I'm just saying, basically though, that you're making a valid point. If I'm in this position, it's a cinch that I'm not the only one, in other words.
Of course. I mean, for instance, the military. So much of the military, the lower-ranking military, they make so little money there on food stamps. Well, when Republicans cut food stamps, they're supposed to love the military so much. They're taking food out of the lives of, off the table of military families. I mean, it's ridiculous. The lack of empathy is phenomenal. And, here we have these rich white millionaires and billionaires, because so many of the people in Congress are millionaires and even billionaires. They have benefited from white male privilege all their life. So many of them have their money because they've married well, or it's family money that was, handed down. I bet you could count self-made men on, probably, 20 of them out of the hundreds of them. They have no idea what it's like for the average person to make ends meet. And what do? They just keep making it harder because they are so detached from the reality of the average person. One of the women Democrats, and I forget her name, she challenged Republicans to live on food, the amount that people get on food stamps. And I remember it was Sean Hannity said, well, so what? They'll eat beans and rice all month. I mean, the callousness, the hatred, and these people are supposed to be Christians? I mean, what about Jesus and helping the poor and the fishes and the loaves and all of that? I don't
That's the
believe they're
interesting
really
part. The governmental party that's doing the cuts is the Republicans, and the Republicans are supposed to be the Christians.
Right, right. So that either means in my book that they're really not Christians. I mean, not in their deeds. Or they've given up on Jesus a long time ago because
wolves in sheep's clothing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they mustn't care about hell. They mustn't think about karma. I think they feel like they're untouchable. That they can do whatever they want. They have this sense of entitlement. But I think going back to our power, I think people have to get, instead of depressed and disempowered, they're going to need to get angry and maybe channel that energy into doing something like we've been describing. Don't just continue to be a victim.
And also don't turn around and become a perpetrator either. I mean, what we're talking about is doing things that are legal and that are productive, not going out and decide to start some kind of, vigilante or some kind of illegal type of picket because let's face it, people choose to do the wrong thing as quickly as they choose to do nothing.
You're absolutely right, Royce, and I definitely do mean nonviolent actions. I mean, you look at Gandhi, you look at Martin Luther King. They always, preached how powerful nonviolent resistance is. And it's funny, in my book, one of the chapters is one of the inspirational messages. I wrote a piece about resistance. Resistance is not futile. It was kind of a play on the Star Trek episode with the Borg. You know how the Borg would always say resistance is futile, resistance is futile. And I make the comparisons between the world of Star Trek and sacred feminine or goddess ideals. And, when I show these quotes that, remember, Spock and Kirk made in one of the movies where Spock said something about, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. When he was telling Kirk, he couldn't sacrifice the ship just for him or something. And then there was another quote that Captain Picard makes later, and he's explaining to somebody about how the people of the future are no longer motivated by personal wealth. They're motivated by development, their altruistic tendencies, how they can be in service. And I started thinking, I'm an old Trekkie. I remember when people wanted to be like the crew of the Enterprise. They just thought they were our heroes. And what happened to that? What happened to that sense of being in service, of altruism, of being a hero? Instead, we've shifted things to admire people who dominate and exploit and who value greed, and don't have empathy. Why are we propping those kinds of people up, instead of the people who give us messages like Star Trek or Martin Luther King or Gandhi?
Yeah, and what the people aren't looking at is themselves when they get older, and their children even further down the road are going to live with the end product of the decisions they're making today.
Yeah.
And you think it's bad now. Look back into the recent past when it wasn't as bad. I mean, when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, it was a fairly decent place to live still, if you ask me. I thought the rules were pretty good and life was pretty economically okay, and you had a little extra money, not a lot, but you're doing okay. And now today, the world's changed so drastically from the 70s just up till now that I'd be afraid to think what it's going to be like 30 years from now.
Well, yeah, you're right, and and I'm probably close to the same age as you. My dad worked for Sears, and he started out as a salesman in the television department, selling televisions. He supported our family on a commission job like that. And he worked his way up to be the manager, and we were able to buy a car, and we bought a little house, and that was with one person working, and we see how things have drastically changed, but there's structures in the government that have changed, that have made things worse. You have like Reagan, for instance, when he when he started the union busting to a certain extent, when the traffic controllers wanted to strike, and he wouldn't let them strike. I think sociologists will tell you, or political science people, that sort of started to tilt things, and we see that unions have been decimated, and where it used to be maybe 40 or 50% of people were in unions, now maybe only 10% of people are in unions. When we had unions, that was bargaining power for the workers, and people had, made enough money so that they could support their families and live. Well, things have changed in government, and corporations have had more influence, and we've eaten away at the at unions, and as a result, workers have less rights, less benefits, and that's the road we're going down. And people so easily get brainwashed. I mean, as soon as they hear, oh, well, if we make the corporations pay people more money, or we make the corporations clean up the toxic waste, or if we make corporations be responsible in any way, it's going to cost people jobs, And that's like here in California. We were trying to pass something where grocery stores were going to have to label with foods, in the produce department, were food with GMOs. Well, corporations like Monsanto sunk all sorts of money into advertising, saying, oh, well, if we label foods, that's going to cost jobs. Well, first of all, a lot of people said that was a lie. And, second of all, I mean, you have to make a choice. Do you want to eat food that maybe is going to give you cancer 10 years from now? Or do you want to know what you're putting in your mouth? And if it costs a few jobs, maybe it costs a few jobs, but there's trade-offs. We can't always believe, anytime we want to hold a corporation to having integrity or being regulated for the protection of consumers, that it's a bad thing. We can't always believe that it's going to cost jobs, especially when the CEOs are making 350 times more than their workers. Let him make 200 times more than their workers and make them do the right thing for consumers. You know what I'm saying? It's just the priorities are so out of whack. They're making all of this money, but yet they're screwing over their workers and they're screwing over the consumers.
And they're actually kind of, in a sense, if you think about it, blackmailing the consumers. I mean, well, yeah, you can complain and try to not do business with us and all of that, but in the end, it's going to be our workers that's going to pay for it, and then things will get even worse further down the road instead of saying let's straighten up and fly right.
Well, I think workers have to grow a backbone, and start to strike and start to speak up and start to band together in solidarity. And I think consumers have to do the very same thing. We can't continue to be these passive sheep, that are being led to the slaughter. Because we do have the power. We do have the power to peacefully resist, and we must. Resistance is imperative. It's not futile. It's an absolute imperative, quite frankly.
And there actually kind of, in a sense, if you think about it, blackmailing the consumers. I mean, well, yeah, you can complain and try to not do business with us and all of that, but in the end, it's going to be our workers that's going to pay for it, and then things will get even worse further down the road instead of saying let's straighten up and fly right.
Well, I think workers have to
Well, yeah, and pretty much the guys that are up on the top of the heap, they're making their world. They're creating their destiny as they go. Everybody else is just letting life buffet them around. You don't switch places unless you do what the other people are doing. In other words, you got, what was it Ric Flair used to say? In order to be the man who is the man, you have to beat the man who is the man. You know, you have to kind of take over, do what they're doing, or your life would just be whatever they dictate.
Well, but there are companies out there that are doing the right thing. Rian Eisler, one of my mentors, writes about companies who are employing caring policies for workers. And you can look up these companies on the internet. I know Costco. I don't know if where you live you have a Costco, but they have them all throughout California. They're a big box store. And the people who own Costco, they treat their employees really good. They make a decent wage. They have decent benefits. And, I think a balance can be struck between a corporation making profits, their shareholders making some money, and their employees having a decent living wage. But we have gotten into this mentality that the employee is the parasite. They're the taker, rather than the person that's making the corporation and the shareholder their money. We have to look at it as like a three-legged stool. You got your shareholders, you got your corporation, you have your workers. Well, they all need each other. And I think as you continue to exploit the worker, it's like one of those legs of the stool is getting cut shorter and shorter and shorter. And, I think eventually it's just going to collapse. Maybe it's going to take things getting worse than what they are. But I just can't imagine that, we're not going to, Americans aren't going to stand up. I think we're going to reach a tipping point. And I think Americans really are going to stand up, whether that means putting their energy into grassroots movements that take care of, campaign finance reform and, using the power of our purse to make these corporations be, have integrity and be responsible. I don't know. I just have to believe that, things are going to shift, and we, the people, are going to make the shifts happen. Because we're living in the age of Aquarius now. We've moved out of the age of Pisces. Astrologers that I talk to say the next 20, 40 years are really going to be a time of change, and I can't help but think, Royce, that all of these things we're talking about, whether it's the Arab Spring or, people in other countries marching in the street, or it's Americans standing up for their rights, I really do believe that things are going to shift and change. You just don't sort of right the ship, so to speak, quickly. It takes time. You have to grow that movement. And I guess I just feel certain that there's so much exploitation, so much unfairness, so much imbalance in the world that, the next generation coming up, the millennials, they see the suffering that their parents are going through. They see the lack of opportunity for themselves. They see how corporations and money or destroying government. I do believe maybe it's going to be the millennials that aren't going to sell out, and they are going to be the ones that are going to maybe use some of our wisdom that we're talking about today,
right,
and make these changes. And and I want to keep emphasizing that these changes we're talking about are sacred feminine ideals, because sometimes when people hear the sacred feminine, or hear goddess, or hear a woman talking about equality, they get it in their mind that this is just a bunch of angry, bra-burning feminists out to rule the world and subjugate men. And it's not. This is about fairness for all of us. This is about partnership for all of us. And, it's just that women and minorities and, they've been at the bottom of the heap for a really long time. And I think for the first time, maybe middle class white people are now feeling what that feels to be like as the middle class sort of, it crumbles. They're starting to feel what women and minorities have always felt. And I think as more people feel that lack, I think things are going to change. I do, but we have to stoke that fire. We have to activate people. We have to get out there and do. We just can't sit passively and be doormats.
Well, we can, but it's going to continue to get worse while we do. But yeah, I think if nothing else, even if what you say doesn't go through, there's going to have to be a point, and this has happened historically, that once the average Joe on the street has had their fill and they can't take any more, that they'll turn around and they'll revolt. Of course, that's not a perfect solution either, but that's the one that's been a recurring theme through history.
Yeah. Well, and we see it's messy. I mean, look at what happened in Egypt. They threw out their leader, because those poor people were exploited while the leader gets rich. And they still don't have that worked out. I mean, government is messy, it's kind of like, what is that expression they use about you don't want to see people make sausage because it's ugly, and I think, remaking the world is not going to be pretty either. And I think just, people say, well, how did we lose the goddess? We lost the sacred feminine over time and for different reasons in different places of the world, many, 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 many years ago. And I think that same analogy probably applies to all change. Change happens slowly. It happens different in different places. And I think when you're trying to rebuild something, I don't think you rebuild it overnight either. I think it has to grow and develop. And I think that's the growing pains, so many places around the world are going through, because it's not a simple fix all the time to get rid of the old, and there's not a perfect new thing to just automatically plug in its place,
Right.
But we certainly have to try. I mean, I think our very survival depends on it.
Yeah, and aren't there still a few places in the world, and I might be mistaken on this, like I think Sri Lanka, or Lanka, however you pronounce it, is one of them, that the feminine is still important over there, but yet they have their country is doing better governmentally than what ours is. They're more peaceful people, and they're economically stronger.
Well, I don't know specifically about Sri Lanka, but I do know that there are still little, there's still little groups of matriarchal cultures around the world. There was some in China. There's some in some, different islands in the Pacific. The Navajo are a matriarchal culture, believe it or not. Everything, the wealth of the family passes from mother to daughter rather from father to son. I think the idea, these ideas of the sacred feminine, this idea for justice, equality, partnership, those are the things that, I think sort of make any society run better. And yes, there are places in the world that still revere the sacred feminine. India, for instance, India, they have never lost their feminine face of God for the last, 4,000 years. Now, the only difference is in India, it started to become patriarchal. So even though they have a feminine face of God, they have Parvati, they have Lakshmi, they have Sarasvati, they have Kali, Durga, all of these different goddesses, the society still became patriarchal, rule of the men, and what happened is the goddesses sort of became what we call domesticated or spouseified. They lost their full power, and they became just the consort or wife of the god. But the reality is, when you look at, say, the goddess Kali, when she's, there's this famous image where you have Shiva, the male god, who's laying down on the ground on his back, and you have Kali, who stands over him with one foot on his chest. What that's actually a symbol of is the sacred feminine needs to activate the divine masculine in order for him to act in the world. So you see that partnership again. One needs the other. She is the force that gives him the power, and then he goes and acts. But he's not acting alone. It's not a patriarchy. It's a partnership. Or, for instance, you have the goddess Isis. Her, in lots of different symbols, you'll see her symbol is the throne. And what that means is it is from her the pharaohs actually received the right to rule. Now, she expected that they would rule with something they called Ma'at. Well, Ma'at is another goddess. It's ideals of justice, of fairness, of the right, right action, truth, justice. And so here is the feminine given the pharaoh the right to rule, but she says, you must be a just and wise ruler. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So over and over again, you see this where it's not only the feminine, playing a very pivotal role. She's the activator, but she's also giving she's also giving Shiva, or the pharaoh, the masculine. She's giving them the template with which to live by, and it's up to him to do the right thing. I was just interviewing on my radio show a couple weeks ago a beloved foremother who's written a lot of books about the sacred feminine. Her name is Anne Baring, and she was describing the sacred feminine and divine masculine, and she described it like this. She thinks of them as both consciousness, and she thinks of the sacred masculine as the cognitive mind. And she thinks of the divine feminine as inspiration and intuition. So the cognitive mind doesn't progress without inspiration and intuition. So here again, you see the necessity for the partnership. It's not one or the other out of balance. It's the two together in partnership in order to make things function in balance, in harmony. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, actually it makes perfect sense to me. And I think I mentioned to you over at Revolution Radio that, I could see the need for the actual balance myself. And, anybody that really knows anything about electricity knows that without the grounding factor, electricity doesn't even work.
There you go. That's another brilliant analogy, And I think the sacred feminine is really the grounding factor, She's the earth. She's where we're rooted. And she brings inspiration. She brings intuition, and that sort of sparks things to happen. And I love that, Royce. I think that's another great way to look at it.
Also, if you look back into the Old Testament, anytime you see wisdom it's replaceable with Sophia. Wisdom was considered a female factor in the ancient Hebrews, but they weren't allowed to really talk about Sophia openly. But
Right.
they knew, the ancient Hebrews did know about the feminine principle, whether they talked about it openly or not.
And you know what's interesting is we still have that going on to a certain extent. Asherah was the feminine principle back then. You know, she was in the temple. You know, there were carvings. You know, she was represented as a tree a lot of times. And you still will have these conservative archaeologists or scholars who want to deny it. I mean, it's right there in plain sight, but they are so sexist that they will deny the historical deny historical accuracy for a sexist agenda. We have out here in California, we have in Los Angeles, we have St. Sophia's. And it's a beautiful church. In fact, a lot of goddess advocate people want to get married there because instead of seeing all of these male faces of God on the altar like you usually do, the nave, I think that's what you call that back part, well, it's the front part of the church. It's where the altar is, but I think it might be called the nave. There is a huge mural of Mary holding Jesus. She dominates the altar there, and but it's a conservative Greek Orthodox church, and the guy who runs it still wants to deny that that wisdom was Sophia, that wisdom was feminine, even though they have ancient texts that show it originally was feminine, just like you're saying. They want to, it's just outright denial, and
they can deny it all they want to. The Nag Hammadi states it for sure.
Well, yeah, and I mean, so when you see something like that, I think these people lose credibility, because they're giving, they are choosing the sin of sexism, in my opinion, over historical accuracy, and not just historical accuracy, but the fact that, the feminine has been denied for so long. Look at the social problems that it's caused. Look how it's affected women's lives. And I don't know, did I mention Jimmy Carter's book that just came out?
I don't think you did, unless I missed it when you did it.
Well, Jimmy Carter, he's making the rounds now, talking about his new book. He's been on Jon Stewart and Colbert and Letterman and Bill Maher. I mean, he's been on Democracy Now!, on NPR. He's everywhere. And he's got a wonderful book out called Call to Action. And, you read the back cover, and the back cover says that, one of the biggest sins that have been perpetuated on the planet is the discrimination of women. And he says it is something that nobody talks about. So he's written this whole book about how religion has caused, the violence toward women, and he himself, he and his wife left their church because they would not, change their sexist views and come to terms with the fact that religion denies women the opportunity to be the best that they can be, so to speak. It denies them, reaching their fullest potential. So yeah, I mean, so when these guys want to deny Sophia, and don't want to, that's one thing. If they want to rewrite history, but I think it's doubly a sin, so to speak, because not only they teaching inaccuracies, but they're also perpetuating sexism, and the results of sexism. And to me, that's not a credible leader.
And it all goes back to agendalism.
Yes.
But they're perpetuating all these things for their own agendas.
Yeah, because I don't have the book in front of me right now, or else I would read it. But he says, Jimmy Carter says, and so many men know this, they understand it, but they are benefiting from the way things are. And, and that's women too, because this isn't just, this isn't just men perpetuating sexism. It's women. They do it as well. Women are complicit in their own oppression because for one reason or another, they like it the way it is. Or
they believe it's the way it's supposed to be and they're afraid to change it.
Yeah. I think for some women, it's the way they've been raised, and they don't want to use critical thinking and see what patriarchy has done women. They think it's normal. Or some might be benefiting from it. Look at Margaret Thatcher. Look at Sarah Palin. Look at Michelle Bachmann. Have they not benefited from, pressing this male agenda? They've gotten rich. Where maybe they wouldn't have gotten elected if they had talked about the kind of things we're talking about.
Yeah, that's one thing you can actually say about Oprah Winfrey. She's been getting a bad rep lately, but she does speak up for the feminine.
Yeah. Well, you look at it, not only was she a minority, she knew that oppression, but she's also a woman, and she knows that oppression too. Sometimes I think people have to experience discrimination in order to fully understand the sin. And I'll reveal something here I never really revealed before. When I moved to Los Angeles, I became a part of a women's group that talked about these sorts of things and claimed to be against the patriarchy, against oppression, but within their own ranks, they discriminated against certain women. There were political agendas in place. And I will tell you, I was one of the women who was discriminated against. And, Royce, it had a profound effect on me. Before that, the idea of discrimination was sort of just a concept. But when you feel it, when you, or the victim of it, so to speak, when you've been damaged by it, you fight it in a
whole new level of reality.
Yes, a whole new level of reality. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
I mean, a lot of people, they don't realize, Karen, that, you can talk about things and it could be the most horrible thing in the world and you could think it's real to you until it actually really does happen. And then you begin to realize you never really knew what real really was until it happened.
True. And that's hard. When people, you think about it, when somebody, when their loved one dies or gets cancer, you try to be empathetic, but you don't know what that feels like until somebody you really love dies or somebody really close to you or yourself gets cancer. It's hard to, fully appreciate the depth of that pain or that experience. And but I think we have to really try to have empathy. That reminds me of like Dick Cheney, in the Bush administration, how quick they were to send American boys to war. Dick Cheney got 4 deferments, so he didn't have to go to Vietnam. These people are so quick to send poor people's sons to war when they wouldn't send their kids. They won't go to war, So I don't know, maybe that's a little bit different. I'm not sure, but it's, my mother always said, put the shoe on the other foot. Try to understand how somebody else would feel. Try to be that other person. And I don't think a whole lot of us really do that. Whether we're talking about billionaires cutting food stamps or billionaire draft dodgers who want to send other people's kids to war.
And that's another group out there that gets discriminated against was draft dodgers. Even after they've done away with the draft, you still got a remnant of the old folk that hanging around that still frowns on the people that were, who was it? Clinton was accused of being a draft dodger, for example. And
Yeah.
how many people say he didn't deserve to hold office because of it?
Right, right. And then you have George Bush, who was in the, what was it? Was it the National Guard or something? I forget. He was in something. And it turned out, he didn't even show up for service. He was helping one of his daddy's politician friends run for office, you know? So, the rich don't play by the same rules that the rest of us do.
Double
Matt
standard.
Taibbi, yes, yes. I mean, Matt Taibbi was on Bill Maher's TV show last night, and he writes for Rolling Stone, I think, and some other papers, and he writes books. And he said his latest book was about the inequality of justice in the country, and he said that he said one thing you can be sure of from all of his research is that if you're a rich person, you have to try really, really, really hard to go to jail, and he cited like the bankers who caused the economic downturn right before President Obama took over office. He said none of those people have gone to jail. Some of these companies have paid fines, but I don't think one person went to jail. But yet he gave the analogy of a black mother who maybe commits $800 in welfare fraud to take care of her kids. She'll go to jail, and he cited this over and over again. And we have to really look at that,
Well, yeah, what do you really look at? I mean, these rich people, they do this here kind of fraud. They may get fined $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. Not a heck of a whole lot given the fact that they're making $100 million plus off of the fraud itself.
Well, true, or you look at these corporations that the right-wing Supreme Court has said are people. When corporations kill people, because they do, when corporations cause the death of people, does anybody go to jail? You can't send the corporation to jail, but obviously some people at the top who made the decisions that caused the people, to die, they don't pay. Maybe there's a lawsuit, but individuals never pay, for their decisions. I mean, in fact, the corporations are structured so that they don't actually have to worry about being sued. So yeah, I mean, all of this stuff, I mean, it are just examples of how things are so out of balance. And again, I keep punctuating it because I want people to understand and not misunderstand. The sacred feminine is about restoring this balance, restoring fairness, restoring justice, because the authoritarian father of patriarchy and capitalism, they fit hand in hand like a glove, and it's it's destroying women, and it's destroying everybody but the rich.
Pretty much everybody but the rich. But then again, I don't see a lot of people making a move to change it until at least the middle class becomes the poor class.
I think you're probably right. I think there aren't enough people hurting yet.
Yeah, pretty much. When the people begin to realize, hey, I was just frowning on those guys that's in the poor class because they just didn't want to work. But when it starts getting to be them, they can't say, oh, well, I didn't want to work. I did.
Yeah.
They're going to have to change their tune all of a sudden.
Well, and look, I hope I don't embarrass you by repeating this again, Royce, but I hope your listeners will go to your PayPal and try to help. In fact, when we get off the line, I hope you will send me your link, and I will send you something, because you know what? We do have to try to help one another. You are here doing this radio show as a service. I doubt that you make a dime off this radio show. You are trying to help the listeners out there, raise their awareness about things. You are in service to your community. And, and I hope, 100 people send you $5 and, help you over this hump. But the hump that you have to get over, I think this is a symptom of our society.
Well, it partially is behind Obama and the food stamp issue, but what really hurt us was the fact that right after he did that, lo and behold, we had a really, really, as you know, cold winter. And, with my lungs the way they are, I can't be in temperatures too cold or too hot. Either one to cause bronchospasms. So we had to heat the house to keep me breathing right. But yet, where do you get the money to pay for the electricity to do it?
Right. Well, yeah, and I know your listeners will probably say, "Gee, that woman is certainly anti-Republican." I am, because it's Republicans who voted against the subsidies to help people who are in dire straits keep their houses heated. And it's Republicans that vote against unemployment insurance when people lose their jobs to no fault of their own, and vote against food stamps. They vote against everything that helps people just keep going. And I just don't understand. Have they no conscience? Would they rather you go die under a bridge, Royce? What do they expect you to do with disabilities? If you could get a job and make more money, I'm sure you'd be doing it. But they seem to think if you aren't, it must surely be because you're lazy, not because you can't.
Right. And, a lot of people in this are actually know you really well. You can't really expect them to know any better. How many people know, for example, that I can't walk to the end of my driveway without stopping halfway there to catch my wind, and that my oxygen level drops if I walk more than 40 feet to about 10 less than what it's supposed to be.
Right.
People don't know these things over the airwaves. They don't know this about the people down the block from me. They don't know what's going on with the people down the road. They do know that there is a segment of people out there that really are honestly living off the system, and,
Sure.
and they make the mistake of stereotyping everybody for that when, the stereotyping is just wrong. What applies to one does not necessarily apply to all.
Well, yeah, I remember it was Reagan who started that welfare queen stereotype, and that's what everybody thinks, the welfare queen driving around in her Cadillac. But let me challenge the thinking on that, okay? Sure, there are always going to be people who game the system, but what's corporate welfare? Isn't that the rich gaming the system? When GE doesn't pay taxes, or Mitch Romney is paying 15% taxes when the rest of us are paying more, isn't that corporate welfare? Isn't that the rich gaming the system? Isn't that corporations gaming the system? Because I know I'm paying more taxes than 15%, and I know I'm not like GE. I haven't paid the government to have all of these loopholes so that I don't have to pay my taxes. So they want to demonize the poor person, who games the system, and I guess they must think that they're living high on the hog on that little bit of welfare money, but they don't blink at corporate welfare or the rich gaming the tax code.
Well, yeah, then what they do to you, though, is they tax you for money that's supposed to go partially to the people who really are disabled, but because they're taking food stamps away from the people who really are disabled, that money's really ended up going to the corporate rich that they taxed out of you, and you're the one getting ripped in the end.
Well, they talked about Walmart the other day, how Walmart works their employees 39 hours a week rather than 40, so they're part-time and don't get benefits.
They're not the only ones doing that.
So all of the companies that do that, and then on top of that, they make so little per hour that they have to get food stamps. Well, it's the taxpayer that's subsidizing those food stamps rather than people like the owners of Walmart who are, billionaires 10 times over paying their workers a living wage. Can these Walmart people really even ever spend all the money that they're making?
Well, see, that brings up another interesting point, and Bill Maher made this same point on a picture on Facebook, or somebody put the words to his picture. I'll put it to you that way, one of the two. But, he talks about the fact that it's not just people like me that are disabled. It's not just the people who are taking advantage of the system. There's another group of people out there that are actually employed that still have to receive welfare or food stamps simply because they can't get 40 hours no matter where they go. They can't get, they do good to get minimum wage, less than 40 hours, and it's just not enough to live on. And Bill Maher was talking about the fact that if Kentucky Fried Chicken is not going to pay the average worker a decent wage, then the welfare is going to have to. And he mentioned how he's frankly getting tired of paying this stuff that the bigger corporations should be paying, in other words.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Again, here we go. There's so much out of balance. And I wonder when people continue to vote for Republicans because they are duped, they are lied to, and they fall for it. They are what is that word? Boonswoggled. I forget the word. But they are tricked into these lies that say, oh, well, we have to stand behind the corporation and screw over the worker or we'll lose jobs. I don't believe that. I don't. I think that's just a way to keep the keep the workers and, keep the average American from fighting back, keeps us out of, it's fear, and so much of what goes on out there in the media, it's fear. Fear of losing your job, fear of liberals, fear of feminists, fear of immigrants, fear of people who are different religion. Yeah. I mean, because if you keep people afraid, you can keep them under your thumb.
Yeah, afraid to fight back. And, look at Obama when he first hit office 8 years ago, or almost 8 years ago. He was the first one to try to go for that corporate tax. And they hit him up with this here Joe the plumber, guy to try to, battle him down on this situation because he was rocking a boat just in his campaign.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, and here you have that idiot Joe the plumber, who's a pawn, a pawn for the rich. I mean, if he were, and it turned out that Joe the plumber was, didn't own a company. Joe the plumber would have benefited from Obama's policies, but Joe the plumber was too busy benefiting,
being
from
bought off.
Yes, thank you. He was being bought off, and in the process, all of these other, these stupid people who were duped when they listened to him, they voted against their economic interests too because they believed the swill coming out of his mouth. I mean, there was a documentary, Nancy Pelosi, how the right hates Nancy Pelosi. They must think she's the devil himself. Her daughter went down into the South and was interviewing all of these poor white people who really, I felt sorry for them. She was trying to show that they really didn't know any better. They're voting against their economic interests, and they're motivated oftentimes because they're being lied to and they don't know any better, or sometimes it's racism, and sometimes it's sexism, and sometimes it's religion. But all of these things keep those people down, and they're so passionate about it. They're that that base of the Republican Party that you can always count on to come out and vote, because they're God, I hate to say it, but they remind me of they're like rabid dogs, they're like these zealots, and they come out and vote on these wedge issues.
They're a loyal bunch.
They are. They're loyal, but they don't even realize that the stuff they're voting against could help them.
But yeah, this is true. And, we've had similar conversations around here, believe me. And it's really amazing, the kind of things that the people will believe without even checking it out. for themselves. Just the level of naivety, and a lot of it's just because they don't want to bother to check it out.
Yeah. Well, look, Royce, I obviously I've been on my soapbox the whole time we've been talking, but I really think the only way we're going to come together is to try to find some common ground.
Yeah.
Look, I don't like Rand Paul. I don't like Rand Paul at all. Because I think he's against civil rights and all the rest. Because he thinks corporations shouldn't be regulated by the government. So that would mean if a restaurant owner doesn't want to serve a black person, they don't have to. If a gas station doesn't want to, put gas in a woman's tank because she's black, they shouldn't have to. Somebody, a drugstore owner wouldn't have to sell contraceptives if they don't believe in it. See, I think that's going way too far. But I could find common ground with Rand Paul over war. Because he's been talking about, how Dick Cheney and the Bush administration lied us into Iraq. So, so I could start to find common ground with that Republican, and maybe as we start to find common ground with each other like that, and we start to know one another, I don't know. I have hope. Because look at how things changed for gays across the country. When gays started to come out of the closet and people started to understand that, gee, you mean that person I've been working with all of these years, they're gay? Well, gee, that's a nice guy. Yeah, I want him to be able to be married. I want him to be happy. I think the human element maybe starts to come up, and maybe we can put aside our fear, because I think fear is really what drives the right wing. And I think if they could really talk to more of us instead of, constantly being filled with hate from corporate-sponsored Fox News, to keep them, rabid and divisive and intolerant, if they actually knew people with different views, and we could find common ground on certain things, maybe we could start to find, a middle road on other things too. I really do think it's possible. I mean, if I could sit down at a table and talk to Rand Paul, I think just about anybody could do it if they really wanted to, and therein starts the partnership,
Yeah, the whole trick is getting to the compromise, but that's the same thing I taught my kids growing up is, rather than duke it out all the time, sooner or later you got to sit down and learn how to just negotiate till you find a middle ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, there goes back again to the sacred feminine ideal of win-win situations. You try
my favorite kind.
Yes, because if I when I give workshops, I actually show this in physical form, and I don't know if I can describe it for listeners on the radio, but I'll try. I've never done it before, but I have two people stand up facing one another and putting their hands up, shoulder level, and they touch hands on each side. So they're standing face to face, their hands are touching, and I say, okay, you're two corporations, and you're battling it out. One of you is going to win, and one of you is going to lose. So do it. So they start pushing against one another and pushing against one another and pushing against one another. And you know what happens? The one that's strongest always wins. It might not be the smartest one. It might not be the one that's the most evolved or has the best ideas. It's always the bully that's going to win, And so then I say, okay, so I get two different people up, and we do the same thing. We take the same position. And I say, okay, you're two corporations, and you want to try to create a win-win situation. You want to create something together so that both of you come out smelling like a rose. And it's interesting what actually happens. The two people look at one another, they smile. This is usually what happens. It's just sort of a natural instinct. They look at each other, they smile. They don't push against one another. Their body language totally is different. You can feel it. And you know what's really funny is sometimes they actually start to dance. They will move their hands from one another, and instead they'll just, they'll start to dance, like maybe holding two hands together on one side. I don't know, maybe you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I get the idea.
Yeah, you sort of get the idea. And if we went into negotiations like that, knowing that there wasn't going to be a winner and a loser, that we were each going to come out with something we needed, I don't know. I hope I'm not sounding too much like an idealist.
Well,
but,
no, I think you got a point there, because I can just see on one side, for example, you got the Republicans sitting there thinking, I either got to win my point or they're going to just take me over. There's not going to be a middle ground. And the Democrats sitting there saying the exact same thing, and then they turn around and charge full steam, both of them bound and determined they have to win for their own survival. And they do nothing but knock heads in the process. I mean, that's what our kids used to do when they were growing up.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like the, survival of the fittest on the schoolyard. And honestly, it bothers me because to me it feels like the right wing, they're bullies. Horrible bullies. They can always dish it out. They can never take it. And the Democrats, that expression, they go into a knife fight with a book, or they go into a gunfight with a knife. They don't have that same sort of killer instinct that the right does. They're more this sort of live and let live. They're always, they're willing to negotiate, in my mind, sometimes too much, because I remember when, just to get any kind of a bargain with John Boehner, Obama was talking about maybe cutting Social Security. We can't afford to cut Social Security, while rich people, aren't paying their fair share of taxes. So it feels like the Democrats are always maybe stretch a little bit too much.
You're breaking up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
It feels like the Democrats are always willing to give up a little bit too much sometimes, where the Republicans don't want to give up anything at all.
Well, yeah, a good example of that would be the food stamp thing I talked about earlier. Who was that guy with the government who was so proud of himself that he had bullied the Democrats by shutting down the government until they agreed to cut food stamps? There's a picture of him on Facebook. I mean, he was, I told them they would have to give in to me, or, something to this effect. A bully mentality, in other words, like you say.
Yeah, and then you saw when they shut down the government, you had one of these Republicans went down to that monument for I think it was Vietnam soldiers or something. It was some military monument, and it was closed because they shut down the government. And this Republican guy starts screaming at the guard there on duty about it being closed. How dare they shut down this monument when we have these these former military people coming to see it. And she was really nice to him, and I don't know how she could have been nice to him, because I think I would have said, you stupid jerk, you're the one who shut down the government. That's why it's closed. I mean, it's the ignorance and the lack of empathy. It's astounding, And
I know people who to this day, even though the Republicans come out and admitted they did it, blame Obama for it.
Oh, for shutting down the government?
Yeah.
Oh,
well, they blame him for the food stamp cuts, which of course was caused by the shutdown of the government.
Well, look, there are people who still believe that that 9/11, that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11. I mean, there's still people that don't know that Dick Cheney.
You're starting to break up again. You're getting a little static on your line too.
I don't know what that's about, because I'm not doing anything different.
Huh. I don't know either.
and I don't actually hear it either, but I don't know. Should I just keep talking, or do we need to maybe cut the call short?
Well, I guess since we don't know what's causing it, we may want to do go ahead and do a wrap because we've got quite a bit out there, and that way we don't have low quality on the last 30 minutes of the show because it's
Okay.
up to now it's been pretty good, you know. But I want to remind everybody once again that you can learn more about her at www.karentate.com. The book that we're talking about today is God is Calling, although I don't think we stuck strictly to the subject, although I think she would agree that a lot of things are said today that probably needed to be said.
And the only other thing I could do, Royce, is I could give you my cell phone number if you wanted to call me back on a different line. That would be the only thing that we could do.
Well,
that
you don't want to do that live on the air, do you?
No. Why don't I send you an email on Facebook? I'll send you the number, and you can call me back.
Okay, doke. And
All
folks, we're going to take a pause while she does that real quick, like.
All right. So I'll hang up with this line. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Last half hour then.
Yeah, I am too. Okay, now back to where we were at. Can you give me a quick reminder? I lost my place.
Well, I think we were talking about how a lot of people are misinformed. They thought President Obama cut food stamps.
Right.
President Obama wouldn't extend unemployment benefits. And I was talking about how many people still think that Saddam Hussein had something to do with the Iraq War. They don't understand that George Bush and Dick Cheney lied us into a war. Rachel Maddow has a great documentary on it where they've proven that it was all about the oil. And, she doesn't say this, but I believe in my heart of hearts that, war makes money. And Dick Cheney was, a big CEO of Halliburton, and Halliburton made a lot of money on that war. In fact, it's called disaster capitalism. You create a situation, and then you get hired to fix the situation. And we know Halliburton, in its different subsidiaries, not only, they're part of the military-industrial complex. They have something to do with, providing military supplies. They help take care of the soldiers, so they benefited by having a war. It created a job for them. The bonds that we buy from them would destroy buildings that they would go ahead and build, rebuild. So it's brilliant in a way when you think about it. You
brilliant for the greedy.
Yes, and that's people who have no empathy to think about the lives that are going to be ruined or lost, also that they can either, get the oil or make money. And I mean, this is like sociopaths or psychopaths, or narcissists. These are really sick people.
Well, yeah, and if more Americans or even people around the world for their own governments, their own military, were joining up, there's no draft, it's a choice made, were to quit joining the service, they wouldn't have the manpower to wage these kind of wars if enough did it.
Well, that's true, but Royce, they fill these young guys' heads full of the idea of patriotism, and they're going to see the world, and they're going to get to shoot these cool guns, and for some of them it's about getting an education. Maybe for others, my husband told me when he was a young man that boys that were in his neighborhood would get arrested for petty crimes, and they would get the choice of, well, you can go to jail, or you can or you can go into the military. I mean, that was
still
during
got that
Vietnam.
choice today too.
Yeah, so I don't know, the system. Again, it feels like it would be nice if women could educate their sons to avoid that temptation. But let's face it, I think a lot of guys like to shoot guns and, you can go over there and play with the biggest toys imaginable, and when you enlist, I don't think you realize the brutality of war, or sometimes young people, have this idea that nothing can happen to them. They feel like Superman. They're sure that, nothing.
I'm not going to be the one getting shot.
Right, exactly. So, it's sort of taking advantage of the, of young people when they're naive, or desperate. Some people on Facebook have said that their sons joined the service because they couldn't find work, So
and that's
it's sort
the
of
sad
like,
part. My son Joshua wanted to join the service for a while, but he ended up changing his mind. And I told him, I said, you can't believe all the recruiters' promises that they make to you. I was, for example, promised free medical when I went into the service years ago. And for a while I did have it, but then somewhere down the line in the 80s or so, the VA started to do what they call a means test, whereby if you made enough money, they would ask you to make some form of payment instead of giving you the free medical that was promised. So far I haven't qualified to make payment. I've been too poor. I mean, even when I was working, I didn't make enough. But the point being, that's not exactly what they promised in the beginning. You see what I'm saying?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, and you look at what's happening to people who are coming back from the Iraq War now. So many of them, they have filed disability claims, and it might take them a year or more for, even the claim to be looked at, much less get any benefits. I mean, that's not taking care of our troops.
No, it's not taking care of them at all. And then how many other times you go walking downtown in Los Angeles, Houston, or somewhere, and you see people there taking handouts, they're homeless, and if you get to know them, you find out they're veterans. Right.
Yeah, and I think it was Ted Cruz. No, it was either Ted Cruz or Bill O'Reilly. I forget which one it was, but they said there's no veterans living under bridges. In other words, there are no homeless veterans. That's insane. I mean, can they really possibly believe that?
I don't see how they can, because I personally have shook hands and made friends and fed several of them myself.
Yeah. I mean, it's really messed up. I believe that I really think our kids need to learn empathy, whether that means they have to, volunteer at women's shelters, or for, at senior citizens' homes, or join something, where they go overseas and they help, like Peace Corps or something in third world countries. I think that should be a requirement. I really do. I think that would be a way to start developing empathy in our children, so that maybe they take it into adulthood. I think Americans should be required to visit other countries too, because it's way too easy to bomb somebody on another side of the globe when you don't maybe even know where that country is, much less anything about it or the people. I mean, I think ignorance and lack of empathy are huge problems, here in the United States, and maybe belligerence too, because, I think about President Bush saying, you're either with me or you're against me, like he's some gangsta gunslinger or something, that doesn't show very much diplomacy or wisdom. It just shows, that he believes in my opinion, that might makes right. And it doesn't, because, just like in that little exercise I described we do in our workshops, The strongest one is only the strongest one. It doesn't mean they're necessarily the brightest one or, or the best one to do the job at hand.
I think this might makes right as a mind virus.
Yeah.
That's what they call that, a mind virus, and it infects whole populations.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as they feel like they're the might, but as soon as they're suddenly not the one with all the power, I think that's when they start to realize that, maybe empathy and cooperation and partnership might be a good thing, if they could ever feel like what it is to be on the losing end of the proposition.
You ever wonder how easy it would be to go to war if you actually met your opponent's wife and children?
Yeah. I mean, you have to humanize it. I think that's why they say if you're ever a captive, where you're kidnapped or something, you want to, try to make yourself human to your, to the person who kidnapped or captured you, because it's harder for them to kill you. If you can make some sort of human connection, with them. And, I think when we went to war with Iraq over oil, they weren't thinking anything, except, about those poor people over there. And, there have been sociologists who have said that, millions of people lost their homes and were displaced and lost their jobs. Women were forced into prostitution,
Wow.
To be able to get food. I mean, all sorts of horrible things, infant mortality, death of mothers, poisoning the environment, birth defects from all the bombs that were dropped. But you see, you don't hear about that in the mainstream media. They don't even let you see the coffins coming home with the flags on them.
Yeah, that is true. And then they just go bury them out in the VA cemetery somewhere where nobody's looking.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, Americans never see the consequences of what the government does. And Royce, you tell me if you disagree. It feels like to me, if the president takes, sends soldiers to war, that, it's almost as if there's a sacred pact. There should be a sacred pact between the commander-in-chief, the president, and the military. The military ought to be able to be sure that the commander-in-chief is not going to put their lives on the line unless it's absolutely necessary. And we now know for a fact that that war in Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. So that was, I would say that's treason. It feels like to me, and is anybody in the Bush administration paying for those lies, for the debt that they put the country in, for all the treasure, our treasury that was plundered? That goes back to what we said before, that the rich never pay for what they do.
Well, it's just, a war mistake. We're not perfect. And granted, there's some truth to that, but there comes to be a point that that's just a cheap cop-out, too. Where do you draw the line is the question.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, people like Bush, they commit all these crimes, but if it ever comes to court of that, they always want to get off with something like, it was just an error in judgment at the time. Like he always claimed the weapons of mass destruction. Later on, he had to admit, I thought they were there. Well, he done declared war on how many people? He got to write it off as a mistake. Where does honest mistake turn into negligence? Where's the line?
Right. Well, I don't know if you've seen that documentary that Rachel Maddow put together. They had the encore performance yesterday on MSNBC. But they have documents showing that in meetings, they were actually talking about the oil in Iraq.
No, I didn't get to see that. What was the name of it again? I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. I think it's called Why We Did It. Why that's what it's called, Why We Did It. And they have people that have come forward and said that Bush was looking for a reason to go into Iraq before 9/11 even happened. And this isn't just conjecture. So I would just, have your listeners, I know if any of your listeners are Fox News fans, they have demonized Rachel Maddow, but she is brilliant. She's a Rhodes Scholar. I would say look at the documentary, she's showing facts. And I think if there was any doubt that Iraq was a bogus war, that, I think she shows that we knew what we were doing when we went in there, and we went in there over the oil. And, and now they talk about how all of the American oil companies are there in Iraq. So, mission accomplished.
You know what? I think they got the full version of this on YouTube. I looked it up while we were talking. I could put that link in the chat room. But just go to YouTube and type in Why We Did It, the invasion of Iraq. It says here full, and it looks like it's a 32-minute video, which I doubt is full, because most documentaries are 2 hours. Do you remember if it was 30 minutes or...
I seem to think it might have been an hour, but I'm not positive. Maybe it's in two parts.
Maybe
on YouTube.
So.
I know sometimes they break things up into 15 or 30-minute segments.
Well, I'm going to post this link in the chat room, but y'all can also get it by going to YouTube and using their search engine and typing in Why We Did It if y'all want to learn more about this here. And I'm going to definitely listen to it after the show myself. Now, I don't want to let you get out of here without talking a little bit more about your book itself, which I regret we didn't spend more time focusing on. However, why don't you at least, tell us something about your book real quick and give the readers an idea what they can look for in it?
Sure. Well, and even though we didn't directly talk about it earlier, we sort of indirectly talked about it because, all of these values we have been saying we wish were in society, those are values of the sacred feminine, of Goddess. And so the book, Goddess Calling, Inspirational Messages of and Meditations of Sacred Feminine Liberation Theology, there's the key right there. It's about how ideals of the sacred feminine will set us free from the society that we live in, gives us ideas to build a different society. And I'll read you with some of the comments that are on back the book. This one from Barbara Walker, who's a beloved foremother and author of a lot of books. She says, Karen Tate encourages all women to rediscover their sacred history, to break the shackles that patriarchal culture has imposed on them, and to take action for the preservation of our Mother Earth. And her meditations are profoundly engaging. Jean Houston, she's famous. She's world-renowned American scholar, author, philosopher. She advises political leaders in the United Nations. She says, a strong, courageous book that will either set your teeth on edge or make you laugh with joy. And, the book is, it's not a long book, and it's easy to read because you can, read it in, standalone chapters. And what these are messages that I actually gave, as sermons, if you will, talks, that I gave at, churches or groups that invited me to talk to their congregations. And, some of the titles are, Dreaming and Inspiration, our Messiah, She of 10,000 Names, Balance in All Things, our Real Wealth, Liberation of Surrender, Harmony from Chaos, Gratitude and Appreciation, Separating Truth from Myth. The Star Trek one is called Resistance is Not Futile. There's one on compassion, hope, and fearlessness. Goddess Notices, where I talk about some situations where I felt like Goddess actually, we could tell her presence was there among us. Embracing the other. So there are 20 different messages on all of these different topics, and then there are 12 different meditations. One's for transformation, to find courage and strength and tenacity. Another is to manifest. It's called Sacred Sanctuary of Manifestation. Another one is for healing. Another one is dreaming and inspiration. And it talks a little bit about why it's important to reconcile our spirituality and our politics. And what that looks like a little bit, considering the two parties we have to choose from. Because until we have a party that's not, until we get campaign finance reform and we take money out of politics, we have to choose the lesser of two evils. And when you look at the Republicans are anti-woman, anti-worker, anti-immigrant, anti-science, pro-corporation, anti-environmental, you can't really vote for them unless you're rich, because they only do things that help the rich. So I talk about how the ideals of true Democrats, not corporate Democrats, but more progressive Democrats, are more in alignment with ideals of the sacred feminine, and I give examples of that.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you packed an awful lot into a small book.
Well, it's an easy to read. It's actually an easy to read book. It's, it's about 180 pages, and you can put it in the bathroom. And when you're doing what you got to do in the bathroom, you can read a chapter and, put it by your bedside and read a chapter before you go to sleep. But you know what, Royce, you have been so good to me. Having me on both your shows, I would say to your listeners, if you don't have the money to buy my book and send Royce a donation, I would say forget about buying my book and really send Royce a contribution at his PayPal button. That's the Goddess way. We have to take care of one another. We have to support one another. And, I hope your listeners will support you and, help you out of this jam that you're in.
Well, I think everybody needs to make sure they get a hold of your book too, because, if you're not familiar with the sacred feminine, how else are you going to learn without getting the books to read the material? And let's face it, you can get books from anybody out there, but do they all have the right information?
Well, that's true. You're kind. Well, you can find the book, at Amazon. If you want to go there, you can buy it for $12 and change right now, and it's actually listed as one of their top new releases. So you can get it there, or you can get it from your local bookseller if you want to try to support an independent bookseller rather than Amazon, multinational corporation. You can also buy it directly from me, and I'll sign it for you. You can get it just about the same price from me as on Amazon by going to my website, KarenTate.com, and there's a Goddess store page there, and when you scroll down, there's actually lots of free stuff on my website. There's meditations for free. There's interviews you can listen to, talks that I've given you can listen to. There's lots of different things there you can benefit from, and it won't cost you a penny.
Okay. Now, I was going to ask you, do you also happen to have a PDF version that people could buy for a little less straight off your site they could download if they want it?
Honestly, Royce, I never thought about that, but I could probably do that if somebody wanted to email me and they could send me, I'd come up with a price, or they could suggest a price, and they could send it to me over PayPal, and yeah, I could send them a PDF. I could do that.
Yeah, I know that if you got a document version of it, that if you put it in Open Office or Microsoft Word, either one, they should have an option in there. I know Open Office does, because that's what I use, that export it to PDF for you.
Yeah, I do have a PDF version because that's what I send editors and radio show hosts like yourself sometimes, so that you can see the book before you interview me. So sure, I could send a PDF out if somebody, was having a money crunch and they wanted the book but didn't quite have the full price. I'd be happy to do that.
Well, I think it's not only that so much as the fact that a lot of people prefer to have it on their computer too.
Okay. Well, me, I like the book. Because I like to take a book and when I'm in the bathtub, I like to read in the bathtub. But you can get, there's an ebook. There's an ebook book you can get off Amazon. But, if somebody gets in touch with me on Facebook, or if they want to email me at my email address, which I'll give right now, which is ancientcultures@ca.rr.com. I'll repeat that. It's ancientcultures@ca, that stands for California, ca.rr, that stands for Roadrunner, because I'm a Time Warner customer, rr.com, ancientcultures@ca.rr.com. And tell me that they were one of your show listeners and they'd like the book, but, they're in a money crunch, and we'll work something out. I'll send them a PDF.
All righty. Well, I'm actually a Comcast user myself, which is actually the future of Roadrunner, because we used to be Roadrunner and we turned into Comcast, and now we're turning into Xfinity.
Okay.
So you may have some changes up there in California coming.
Oh, who knows? Yeah, you might be right. Well, nobody ever understands that email address. That's why I repeat it so many times. But anyhow, but please send me your link, Royce, your PayPal button, because I do want to send you a contribution, to help you, during this time you're struggling, okay?
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Just to let all the listeners know as well, you could either click on the donate button on my website, or you could just simply go to PayPal, and my email for them is royce41200@yahoo.com, and you could do it that way. Of course, if you come to my site, you'll be able to see all my upcoming shows that you don't get to see just without coming to my site, that aren't listed elsewhere yet. And as well as that, you got access to my archives here at my website as well, if you want to stop by. And Karen, your book is going to be in my, linked to from my archive. It's linked to from my front page right now, but later tonight or tomorrow, I'm going to post it to my archive and to YouTube. And then I'm going to put a link to the book, with it in the archive, so people can have an easier time reaching it. But that'll be to the, Amazon copy, but it'll still have your link at the top by your picture and by your book cover to your page.
Okay. All right.
You'll see it. I'll send you the information. And just to let everybody know who listens, what I usually do is I post the full version over at YouTube and at my site, and a half version at Daily Motion, because they don't like it when my shows go too long, and it's easier for them to take smaller shows. So Daily Motion usually gets the half version.
Well, and before we go, Royce, if I could just offer something free to your listeners, is that okay?
Sure.
For the first 5 of your listeners, as long as they're in the United States, because I can't mail books outside the United States, it costs too much money. For the first 5 of your listeners who gets in touch with me, either on the email address that I just gave at Ancient Cultures or Facebook, and tells me that they heard me on your show, I will send them a free copy of my book, Walking in Ancient Paths. That's my second book that was out, not the new one, but the second book, and it's actually won an award. So, I think they'd enjoy that. It's a book about how to incorporate the sacred feminine into your life or your community.
Okay. And I would definitely encourage people to get together and maybe try some of the things we suggested, and to maybe come up with some of your own things that could be beneficial. Karen here was talking about getting your kids involved. Back when I was a kid, parents and grandparents used to get their kids involved in gardening. If you just did that and you made it available to the poor, or even available to the people in the neighborhood that can't take time off to garden, and they could get it from you cheaper without the GMOs that they get at the store, well, you're providing a service right there and enriching your own life financially as well as spiritually at the same time. So, don't think there aren't things you can't do. The question is, are you up to do it? Do you have the time? Do you have the desire? Do you have the drive would be the bigger questions. So
right.
I'm going to leave
Right.
you guys with something like that to think about. Karen, it's been a pleasure having you. You're really a lot of fun of a guest to have.
Well, thank you, Royce, and I think you're an awful fun host to talk to. I sure appreciate the time you've given me on both your shows. I really appreciate it.
Well, I say we ought to stay in touch and maybe do this again in the future.
Okay, thank you. I really would enjoy it.
Okay, you have a good day, and everybody, I want to thank y'all for listening. If you did nothing but listen, you still participated. I want to thank you for it. Show doesn't exist without listeners and guests both. Remember that. Y'all be good and have a good weekend.
For authors, filmmakers, entertainment, and all your listening needs. Listen now to Talk Now Radio, where no topic is taboo.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me this morning, or this afternoon, should I say, is Karen Tate, the author of God is Calling. And, well, Karen was on my other segment on Revolution Radio 3 or 4 Thursdays ago, and we had a really excellent show, and she was gracious enough to agree to come over here and share about her book and herself over here on this show with you guys as well. So we got her all set up for today. I think you folks are in for a treat. Karen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me back, Royce. I really appreciate the chance to talk to your listeners.
Well, I want to thank you for coming back on the air. It's going to always, I think, be a pleasure to have you. I know you're going to probably have future books coming out in the future. We'll probably hook up and, talk again somewhere down the road, I'm pretty sure. But judging from the last show that we did, well, I thought we worked pretty well together, and I think it's going to be a good show.
I agree. We had fun.
So that gets us right up to the meat of the topic here, which is your book, God is Calling. And before we go into that, this is something I didn't think to mention till later on in the show over at Revolution Radio, was the fact that you're not just working on God is Calling, but you also took a part in the documentary Femme Women Changing the World. Is that correct?
Yeah, I sure did. It's actually Femme Women Healing the World, but
Oops.
It's changing, healing. That's okay. It's in the end, it's all sort of the same thing. We hope that maybe women, or maybe more specifically ideals of the sacred feminine, are healing and changing the world, or can heal and change the world. That documentary was financed by, in part, executive produced by Sharon Stone, the actress, and actually there were a lot of people who contributed to the film, but she's probably the name people recognize most. And the producer of Wonderland Entertainment, called Emmanuel, ATA, he's a wonderful French man who I look at him and I think of him as a Renaissance man. He is definitely the man of the petroleum because it somehow benefits you,
which is the main thing people are into today, is control, like you were saying earlier. Uh, if you look back through history, and I'm pretty sure you're aware of this, back in the early days of Egypt, back in the time of Zep-Tepi, and even after Zep-Tepi, long before monotheism came along, they had pagan worship in which it didn't matter. They were all male, female gods, being worshipped pretty much equally. And during this time, it was considered pretty much a golden age because everybody lived in peace.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, even the Romans, who dominated so much of the globe, they knew if they wanted to keep peace and order in their kingdom, and they did for a very long time, they allowed their conquered people to keep their gods, as long as they paid homage to the emperor, And but we don't have that tolerance now, we don't, and also too, you think back about, it was the Greeks who gave us so much of our knowledge, that we base so much of our society on. They were pagans. You look at the founding fathers; they were deists, but they were also Freemasons. And Freemasons understood the importance of having a balance between the masculine and the feminine. You even see in a lot of their symbols, you'll see two columns, and those columns represent the masculine and feminine. You see the same thing in the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. You have, they respect the masculine and the feminine, the two different, sides. So we tend to lose that. Christianity came along and made us and sort of demonize the material world. Everything was about God was outside of ourselves. That the earth wasn't sacred anymore. Humanity wasn't sacred anymore. So that sort of I think sort of set the stage for abuse and domination. And I think it's and the earth and this, really we look at the earth as the feminine consciousness. We look at women as the feminine consciousness. We look at the ideas of caring, sharing, nurturing as the feminine consciousness are in our religion. And, the film, talks about that so people understand how things were, how things changed. But it's really solution-oriented. It doesn't just bitch. It gives solutions. And really the solution to everything that ails our planet is partnership. And, partnership is what the sacred feminine or goddess is all about. And that's what I talk about in my books. And and because partnership, whether we're talking about us and our spouse or us and our friends or, whether we're talking about partnership between corporations. Yeah, husbands and wives, corporations.
Boss and employee. I mean, I think it's in all facets.
Yeah, because, there's so much domination out there. We have corporations dominating employees. We have corporation abusing consumers. We have corporations destroying the earth. We have governments destroying other governments. One religion wants to, dominate or destroy another religion. We are obsessed with domination and control and exploitation rather than partnership. So we're talking about partnership, and maybe partnership might even lead to love. What do you think? So we want to try to create win-win situations in partnership rather than this dominator capitalistic idea of there's got to be a winner and a loser. One person has to dominate the other and control the other, and we see how out of balance that has made our society. The earth is being destroyed. The species are dying. Jimmy Carter just put out his new book, A Call to Action, talking about discrimination of women across the globe as one of the biggest sins that nobody even talks about, You have Republicans going on the rampage right now because we're talking about equal pay for women. Just a year or two ago, they went on the rampage when we wanted to have a law protecting women from domestic violence. we live in a crazy world, and
Mm-hmm.
we need to get rid of this domination and exploitation. Everything isn't always or shouldn't always be about let's exploit somebody for cheap labor, because that's what it comes down to. Exploit somebody for cheap labor or exploit somebody so you can convince. I mean, you look at a farmer, for instance. He has to do all of these different things to the earth for things to grow. He's got to, he's got to take care of the soil. He's got to plant. He's got to water. He's got to make sure there's no frost. Well, that's nurturing the soil, and when he nurtures the soil, things grow. That's sort of a feminine concept. So, this idea that that the pagans used to have, that the earth was sacred, that went out the window with Christianity. And I think until we can restore that idea that everything is sacred, everything in the cosmos is sacred, we will not respect the earth or the species or other people or the female gender. And we are, I think, doomed to continue down this, spiraling down this hole.
Well, I think a lot of it is also it becomes a lot easier to destroy an entire rainforest once you don't have to have respect for that rainforest anymore.
True, and I mean, we're so short-sighted. I hate to say it, but we have so many people in business who want to deny science. They want to deny the climate is changing. They want to deny if they destroy the rainforest that it's going to affect the atmosphere, and, we're not going to be able to purify the air, because everything's always about the bottom line and and money. And what's ridiculous is, a few decades ago, CEOs used to make 35 times as much as their workers. Now they make sometimes 350 times more than their workers. And who is worth that kind of money? Unless you're curing cancer or solving, or solving poverty across the globe or figuring out a way to give everybody on the planet free electricity. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't think anybody is worth that kind of money. And to make that kind of money, you're exploiting your workers, you're raping the environment. You're maybe selling people things that aren't safe for them because there's no integrity left. It's all about greed. And we as individuals, I think we have to do everything we can to shift things, because if we don't do it, if we don't get together in solidarity and sort of change things at the grassroots level from the ground future, he really sort of gets it. But yeah, the film, and if your listeners are interested, you can Google Femme, F-E-M-M-E, the movie, or you could go to my website, KarenTate.com, and on the front page of my website, if you scroll down just a little bit, you'll see the logo of the Earth, and you can click on it, and you can either stream it live or download it. I think it's like $4.99 is all. And, I really encourage people to do that and maybe, instead of like your book club kind of discussion, maybe have a movie night and show the film, because it's a courageous film. It starts at the beginning, and I'm happy to say I was in it, and I have some little snippets, and I talk about the sacred feminine, and how the sacred feminine is about the we and the us instead of the I and the me. And it goes through, how we believe, scholars will say in ancient cultures when we still revered a feminine face of God or a goddess, that oftentimes women were more elevated in society, or we had more equal, egalitarian societies. But then as patriarchy takes over, as mythology changed, and the feminine face of God was swept beneath the rug, so to speak, and we only see this male god, this monotheistic, God or Yahweh, with Allah, whatever you want to name you put on him, patriarchy comes, on the scene across the globe in humanity, and that's the rule of the father, the rule of men. And it gives men license to dominate women, dominate the earth, and puts women in a second-class status. And, you can actually, connect the dots between losing a feminine face of God and women being second-class citizens across the globe. There's a direct correlation there. So when people say to me, well, why do you care about these ancient goddesses? Well, we know that when mythology shapes our society, and if our mythology ignores the feminine face of God and only teaches about the male face of God, then it's out of balance. And that's what we end up with. We end up with male leadership when we only have a male God in our mythology.